think that worked well. I mean, because we could see you.
Yeah, different dates.
Yeah, different times, and yeah. So that did work well.
Yeah. And how did, well, you had the second lesson and the third lesson, or the sixth lesson. How did you see those as being different?
I felt kids, I struggled sometimes towards the end because kids were automatically adding in those pieces of evidence. And so there was times like, oh yes, I need to push more right here. And then there were other times I wasn't sure when to push for more, you know, or how to phrase that question in a way that would get them to do more, to say more without me leading, you know. So because they just became natural at bringing that in, and she said they were doing that in her other classes too, just were naturally starting to add that piece of evidence.
Yes.
Like, wow, where do you go from that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it then becomes facilitating or paraphrasing, and paraphrasing in greater detail. You did a nice job with asking the second question about evidence.
Okay.
And, you know, does it become taking a piece of what their evidence is and diving deeper with that and asking?
So would I ask that question again then?
You could.
Yes, yeah.
You could.
Because I saw a lot of places where if you would have asked that second question, because I kept sort of writing down the second question, there was some great information I think that would have gone deeper. It was with the pigs when they were saying something about them being in jail, or the people were behind the trees, and that was kind of, and they were chasing the pigs out or whatever. I thought there was a few places in there that might have been richer if you would have asked that second question. Because I just think there was a lot there. I mean, because they were digging deep into some other information and stories and stuff. Because and so I kept kind of writing down second question. So I think even if they said because I just think I guess you have to kind of watch for those opportunities, and you know, you're still trying to get just the process, but yeah, because there was some.
The next step.
Yeah.
There were times when asking the second question on the photo of the farmer and the two children, and then you would ask that question, facilitate what they've said, and there was this spot when they were talking about the veins, that it was a photograph with the veins, and that you could have gone deeper there, but you did a nice job with it as well. And so it becomes that in the moment, can I go deeper with this, and asking that question.
And so not everything needs to go deeper, right?
No,
not necessarily.
You might cause them to get, okay, this is redundant, you know?
Right. But it's your decision as a facilitator to figure out when
there would be some other times. And I have to be honest, that's not always a strength of mine to, you know, I love the frames of these questions because it does cause me to ask the deeper, but I don't always know when to dive in even deeper than that.
So how has this been for you? I mean, how has this changed the classroom dynamic, or has it, or what are you noticing?
That is hard. I have to say that's probably been the hardest part because it's not my classroom.
Oh, that's right. Right.
So going in and visit, and basically once a month. Now, maybe if we would have framed it that I went in once a week for 7 times, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I might have been able to get to know the class as a better, you know, would have been able to observe something different, but.
Right.
But you were saying that the teacher said that they are just now kind of offering more evidence of things. So you have like talked to her about.
Definitely. Yep. Definitely talking about that. And then she's noticed too that they've been more patient with one another. You know, I think there's one that loves to blurt and can easily get off track. But he even just became more patient and listened and even was able to piggyback off of somebody else's statement, you know, which for him at the beginning, I don't think that she would have seen that happen. So she did notice how they had changed too. And she, usually when I went in, she called on the kids and she said at the beginning, just be aware that everybody's going to have to respond to one of these images today. You know, so that was her expectation, is that all kids responded to at least one of them. So I know that we've heard from everybody every single time.
Oh, wow.
Sure.
Boy, that's nice.
Yeah.
Wow.
She made that a point of doing that.
I did notice growth over your second lesson to your sixth lesson and the images that you were looking at and working with. You seemed more comfortable.
Yes.
In many ways as you were doing the different images. I also noticed that you were picking out different words as you were paraphrasing and being intentional with vocabulary.
Yes.
There were a couple points where you were surprised at what was said. And it came out, and so then you weren't neutral any longer.
Right. I know.
To kind of watch that a little bit.
Okay.
What else? Oh, I also noticed between lesson 2 and lesson 6, that as you were paraphrasing, you began to use believe more. You believe this, you believe that. And I was wondering what, in terms of your wording, how did you choose that as a pattern? Or did it just happen?
I don't think, conscientiously, I don't think I chose that. I don't know.
Okay.
Maybe I'd started doing that because I wanted to make sure. I was so worried about paraphrasing what they said.
Okay.
So maybe that's why I started doing that, is I wanted to make sure that I had captured what they were telling me and that I was getting it accurate according to. So maybe that's how, but I totally did not conscientiously.
Okay. So with that, knowing that, I would suggest going back to think in your paraphrasing, that you think this, or you notice this and you're thinking this, or you notice this detail here and this, you're thinking about it being this way. And the checking that you did at times of did I capture everything, I thought was nice. It showed that you were honoring what they were saying and their voice and wanting clarification. So I think that at times, I think that's a good thing to do.
Okay.
Because I was noticing on the hide, the winter count thing, because there was time you were really surprised. You're what? Where are these? Yeah, and I thought,
I'd be surprised.
Yeah. I mean, they were seeing all kinds of incredible things, which was really interesting because they talked about what they thought was the story, but then they started looking at the actual object, and then sort of digging into that a little bit, and so. I just thought that was really interesting because that was a huge shift for them to, focus then on the actual object itself. And
yes, and I did. There was a huge, and I don't even know exactly when that happened, that they really started zooming in on tiny details.
Like the fish face and the animal face and all the bird and the people and it was very interesting. So. And then that, and that does happen where somebody will say something, then all of a sudden everybody kind of follows down that path. So, but I mean, you were like, what? So, yeah.
I gave them an indication, didn't I?
Yeah. So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, saying, I'm not sure where this is that you're focusing in on. And you said that. could you come up and point at one point? And that, I think that's totally okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the whole left, lower left, I thought that was nice too, to help you.
Yes. Yeah. And
Figure
good
out.
for them too, to sort of,
Absolutely.
you know, not only to say it as you're trying to figure out where to point, but for the whole class, like, okay, lower left. So yeah, that's a
Yeah.
good,
Because they didn't start off that way. They started wanting to come up. And I said, oh, let's just see if we can explain where it's located in the picture.
Mhm.
And I did notice, like, the 3 kids who she had doing the writing, the pre and the post, they would add that in. Oh, and beneath the rug, or, you know, they would add the directional statements in there. So I think that was pretty powerful for them to catch on to that.
Yeah. And were they just doing that on their own? They had just started doing that, or is that something that she sort of has directed them to as they're describing things on the board or whatever? Is it kind of a class
you know what? I'm not sure about that. I'll have to ask her if she's noticed that they've done that more, like in other areas, or I don't think she's directed that.
Okay. Well, I mean, it's kind of interesting, you know.
I know it towards the beginning, they started coming up, and I said, let's see if we can figure out a way to describe it instead of, because otherwise we're going to have
Oh,
there.
that's probably.
Sure.
So I did at one point, and then I tried to, so in the lower, so I did try to model that, but.
So were there any surprises for you throughout the year?
I think I just kept noticing, and maybe this is typical. They just kept going into story. And is that typical that people want to start telling stories about the images?
Yes.
Is that okay? Is that
Yes.
yes.
Yeah.
Totally fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Because we all want to make it, related to us. We kind of want to, and I think younger storytellers and stuff, and that's an actual stage too. So.
Okay. I think something too is I could always tell what they might have studied in social studies, or because it always came. There was something that would always come up or come back to. They would find something. So it was neat to say, oh, you've been studying civil rights, okay, or and that one in the session too, where they were in the trees and the white robes. All 3 of those images that day, they kept bringing up slaves. And they found something to talk about slavery in every single one of those, and I thought that was very interesting. And I don't know how that, unless I don't know what they might have been studying at that time, but I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, and that's pretty cool that they are carrying that information. You know.
You can tell what they're thinking about.
Well, and for her as a teacher, she could almost use that as kind of a assessment piece, that they understand, because now they're applying it in a whole different.
It's a formative assessment.
Yep. Another piece that I know too is how they kept going back to the type of art that was brought, that it was. And it had some very in-depth ways of determining if it was this method or this method. And that impressed me. And I know she does a lot of arts in her classroom, but still that impressed me. And if they didn't know, they needed to know. We'd have to look that up at the end of the session to find out what type of art that was.
Nice.
Wow. Yeah, because that piece with the guy with the holding on to the deer, whatever it was, the thing around. I mean, I remember they were, no, it's a carving out of wood, and it's, I mean, they were very specific. Yeah.
And I know they've not done that. They've done a lot of watercoloring techniques and things like that. So, you have to recognize that.
Yeah.
And as part of Abigail's aesthetic development theory, that's part of the second stage.
Okay.
So you had students moving between the first and the second stage throughout the presentations.
That's powerful. I'll have to tell her that.
Yeah, well, I
Yeah.
mean, it is when you
Yeah.
think of just between those two lessons.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's huge.
Well, and they're third graders, you know?
Yeah, which is, I had third grade tours in here yesterday, and those kids, boy, oh boy, they are really smart. They
Yeah.
really are. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So do you have any questions at this point in terms of facilitation or paraphrasing or any part of VTS?
I think it's just, and maybe it's just the more I do it, it's that paraphrasing piece and knowing when to take go a little deeper. You know, I might ask that second question first, but knowing when to go even deeper a third time with the question.
Mhm.
I know that's something I have to figure out. Any clues on how I determine when to do that?
There was one comment I remember, like when it was again the pig picture, because I just thought that one there was really some cool opportunities because they were obviously bringing information into it from someplace else. And there was one person that said, "Oh, that man there lives in that castle." And that would have been, well, what do you see that makes you say that? I mean, the difference between him and that crowd, because they kept sort of, making connections between the people in the trees and this guy out here. And, there was some real interest in sort of the dynamics of the situation, what they were doing. Were they good, bad, beating on the pigs? Were they hurting the pigs? Were they saving the pigs? And then, but what made him different, that he would be living in that castle. I really kind of wanted to,
Know what made them say that.
Yeah. I mean, there were some really good moments. And I mean, but I think overall, Barb, you just really did a great job. I mean, you're just a natural in that position, I think, and you were listening really well. It's not easy, is it?
It is so not easy. And especially the neutral part too,
Yes.
It seemed like it was easier at the beginning because I was really following. And then as you get more comfortable, when I have, these looks of surprises, I think I'm also floored by what somebody just said,
Yes.
Yeah.
So the kid talking about the vein. I mean, I know that was a moment that just like shocked me. Would that be something you could come to after the VTS or not?
Well, you could, or even then you could ask that second question of what do you see that makes you say that it might be a vein.
Okay.
And to go deeper with that. But it's kind of like listening for assumptions. Is this an assumption, or is it based in the evidence on the picture? And how could I word this to go deeper?
Okay. I like that.
Because I even noticed when I had the third graders up we had that painting show, we brought that image from the show that we had, the Native American painter, and the kids upstairs, because I kind of, I wanted that, they just were kind of getting about, the idea of story. And I just asked them, I said, well, have you studied as a third grader? I didn't think they had, but I didn't know. So I asked, have you studied any myths or legends, And they were like, no. But then they kept bringing up the language of myths and legends. I mean, the sort of the whole construct of what that is. And so it was really kind of interesting because they did know about myths and legends. They just hadn't had it in class because, because I had to ask them. I was just really surprised for third graders, sort of their level of knowledge. And so I asked them, have you seen it in a book, or, how have you come across? And they just like, oh yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, they didn't really, they just knew a lot. I mean, they were exposed to so much. I was really curious where they had seen it, or, where that knowledge came from.
Yeah.
The other piece that I thought that you did really well, Barb, was to think about conditional language and how you were using conditional language, and it was solid throughout your whole facilitation.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
And I was trying to be conscientiously
Okay.
making that, you know, and I also was like with her vocabulary, I was conscientiously trying to bring another way to say that into it. So that
Yeah, your paraphrasing was good. I mean, you could tell you had, you know, you did a good job in that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I don't, and not at this time.
Okay.
I'm
So-
hoping to do some more practicing this summer, you know,
Okay.
in different capacities. So I'm not sure yet, but
Well, I think you'll be surprised how just sometimes in conversation or whatever, it'll, you know, you go, oh, what do you see that makes you say that? Or, you know, it's amazing. It just becomes how you communicate.
Yes.
that's a good thing.
Yeah, mediation, kind of.
So what are your goals at this point with VTS?
With VTS, is that what you?
Mhm.
I want to do more with it personally. Do some more facilitation, and I really do want to look at going beyond. I just think it's powerful. So.
Well, I mean, just what we've been talking about and all the surprises you had and sort of all those revelations. I mean, it is evidence how powerful it is. And I love that the teacher's noticing sort of that crossover.
Yes. And I've known her for years, and so I just know she's a very conscientious and thoughtful, but she would never tell me something that wasn't happening if it weren't. You know?
Right. And so that's a nice opportunity too for you, the two of you, to kind of have a conversation about, you know, a little more in depth about what she's noticed with transfer, some of those kinds of things would be really, you know, because I think at the end when people actually started to really think about and look at and document changes, how surprised they were. I mean, we think we're jotting all this down and remembering, but it's, it's amazing.